Hi everyone, welcome to the Chapter 7 lesson. I'm Professor Rios. I hope you're doing well. This week chapter is about Southwest Asia and North Africa. So we're moving away from sub-Saharan Africa and onto North Africa. And there's some real meaningful reasons why your book and generally everybody really splits this region up into North Africa and then sub-Saharan Africa. There are many cultural, religious, climate reasons why this happens. Okay, so we'll get to the lesson coming up in a bit. First, let me take you through the Google Earth sort of view of it. So as you can see here, North Africa, the Middle East, often referred to this region right here. So you can think of the Arabian Peninsula, including Yemen and Oman and the UAE, where Dubai is. Qatar, this is where the 2022 World Cup is going to be held in basically, I think it's November 2022. So if you zoom into that, it's not really an island, it's sort of a peninsula that sticks out of the region. Of course, you have Saudi Arabia itself, the country of Bahrain, Kuwait, and then of course you have Iraq. The areas of the Middle East were often referred to as the Fertile Crescent or the Levant, including Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and Turkey. Turkey is an interesting region, and we talked about land bridges in this classes. There's not that many in the world, but the ones that are there are significant. Turkey is meaningful geographically because it sits sort of as a bridge, as a little rectangular bridge between Europe to the northwest and the Middle East to the southeast. So Turkey is interestingly positioned. They would like to be part of the European Union. I don't think they will ever be. And they're sort of stuck between two worlds. The further east you go, the more Muslim, the more Middle Eastern it is. The further west you go, the more European it feels. Including, of course, the city of Istanbul, which itself is split by a river, separating into what would be sort of the Middle Eastern side and the European side. So that itself makes it unique. Of course, you can think of a place like Israel and the Palestine region, Gaza. It's been in the news quite a bit because of unrest there. You have, of course, Jerusalem, which is claimed as the capital of Israel, and also the Palestine region. It is a superbly conflicted region, and it isn't just a function of religion. We're talking about water rights and access to water. It is a very sort of water-stressed region with only one freshwater lake in what's called the Sea of Galilee. And then, of course, the water that flows through the Jordan River into what we call the Dead Sea. So the Dead Sea is an area of the world that has the saltiest water. I got a chance to go here and float on it, and you literally do float like a cork. It is 37% salt. To give you a bit of reference, normal ocean water, if you go to Coney Island or to Jersey Shore or Montauk or any beach in the Northeast, typical ocean water is between 5 and 7% salt. The ocean or the water in the Dead Sea is 37% salt. So if you have any cuts and you go into that water, it will really, really sting. Okay. This region right here is under severe stress as a function of, you can see how the water has receded and left behind all these different rings. And as a function of that, there's also quite a bit of potholes and sinkholes that are happening in this region, especially as one heads further south. So this is a very, very conflicted area. It's an area that is under complete, if you go in here, you actually see all the sinkholes. See if this image clears up a bit. No, doesn't look like it will. But this area here is full of sinkholes because as the water recedes, the salt that is under the soil gets fresh water from the hills, which then dissolves and it leaves behind a pocket of air, and then that ground collapses. So it's a very, very stressed region. Competition for water resources is extreme. And that's the case also in Lebanon and in Syria and other such places. If you look at a place like Dubai, known for its building boom, we'll look at this in the actual slide presentation. This country, the country of the United Arab Emirates, is one of the few places in the world that has no rivers and it has no lakes, none. And so all the water that it gets is from the ocean, reclaimed water from the ocean, desalinized. Okay, let's see, let's look at other parts of the area. Of course, you have Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and Saudi Arabia is home to two of the holiest sites in Islam, so Medina. Okay, and of course you have, let's see if I can find it here. Oh, I can't seem to find it. But anyway, we'll get to it here in a second. Two of the holiest sites, Mecca and Medina. Then moving away from this area, you have North Africa. So North Africa is mostly desert. It is a significant sand pile, if you want to think of it that way. It is bigger than the United States. In fact, the United States would only fit from here to about here. That's where the United States would fit, like all of it. So, you have these big countries of northern Chad, Sudan, Niger, Mali, Mauritania, Algeria, Libya, Egypt, which are largely uninhabited. You only have to go to the extreme northwest of Morocco and Algeria and Tunisia to find a climate that is more like what you would find in Spain or the south of Italy. So by and large, aridity is what defines this region. There's, of course, the ancient Nile River, which supported a population there in Egypt that goes back thousands of years. But even there, you can zoom in and see the fact that the majority of people in Egypt live within the confines of that river channel. Now, in Egypt, what's going on? You have the old city of Cairo, and then there is a new city of Cairo being developed. Literally, the country is sort of reinventing the capital away from the original capital. So here's original Cairo, here is new Cairo. And when you look at old Cairo, it's sort of very organic. The roads are sort of all over the place. Of course, there's bridges and that kind of thing, but it's, it's very, as you can see, congested, and the roads are not perfectly laid out. If you go and look at the city or the layout of New Egypt, and you can see, notice, it's expanding in all kinds of places. It is a lot more organized. It is much more planned. In fact, here's like Future University in Egypt. Water management, I mean, the homes, there's plenty of desalination going on. It is a much more planned landscape. Notice how sort of, if you look at like little neighborhoods, you can see how each has a little park, a little green space. The houses are better laid out. There's parking areas. Again, it's a much more planned community. And the goal is to move as many as 6 million people from old Cairo into new Cairo in order to sort of decongest this area. So that's, that's what you can do with enough planning and enough land, if you can convert some of that otherwise useless land into something a little bit more significant. Of course, you have the Suez Canal, which connects the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean, cutting travel over Europe by a significant amount of time. So that is sort of the review of the geography of the region. Again, it is marked, primarily defined by aridity, very dry area, regardless of where you are. And it is situated north of sub-Saharan Africa. Remember, that area that separates that from the desert would be the Sahel. We talked about that in last week's class, and that is that area that it isn't quite desert, but it's not quite tropical rainforest either. It's that in between. All right, so let's finish this and let's move on to the presentation. So this is the skyline of Dubai, with the tallest building in the world almost at the center. That's called the Burj Khalifa. It's the tallest building in the world, and it will probably be the tallest building in the world for a while. To give you a sense of how tall this building is, if you live in New York or have visited New York City, this building is about 1,000 feet taller than anything New York City currently has. So, pretty tall building, 2,700 feet. Some of the lesson objectives and some of the terminology. So again, setting the boundaries, we set them up in that little Google Earth tour, but it does stretch from the Atlantic Ocean to the very, very west, to the Caspian Sea. Some of the binding elements of the region: climate, culture, language and religion, and oil. You can't get away from that. And there it is. There are significant plate boundaries throughout the region. So, for example, there is a big, big boundary that goes right through Istanbul, home of some significant earthquakes, the Mediterranean Sea, the Middle East, and the Red Sea. This part of Africa is splitting away from that part of Africa, so the Red Sea is getting bigger with time, at least in geologic time scale. So think of it as a region of cultural hearths. And a cultural hearth is sort of an area that is like home to whatever. And it could be, it's home to Islam, it's home to Christianity, it is home to Judaism. It is generally considered one of the areas, one of the cradles of civilization. So Mesopotamia, the whole Fertile Crescent, including Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Turkey, and of course Egypt to the southwest. So think about the idea of development and change. This is what one of those ponds in Dubai looks like. With one of the world's few 6-star hotels. They do exist. There's not many of them. This is one right here. It looks like the sail of a ship, and it is a 6-star hotel. So you can imagine how expensive it is to stay there. And here's what Dubai, this city you see in the background, this is how Dubai has changed. And it changed so much because it recognized that it would not have oil to depend on for its economy forever. So it decided to sort of reinvent itself as a form or an area for tourism, banking, sort of the Las Vegas of the area, if you want to think of it that way. Some instability, although ISIL or ISIS still exists, it's not to the point where it was back in 2014, 15, 16, 17, but it's still around. You have issues, of course, in Syria and Iraq, both with colonial origins. There are issues ongoing in Israel, of course, and the tumult that exists between Israel and Palestine. And it seems to have gotten worse as of 2021. It's always in flow. It gets better, it gets worse. It frankly depends on an American administration. So the difference between the Trump administration and the Biden administration and how each approached the region and the conflict within the region, that's always going to be the case. And unfortunately, it hasn't really got any better. After some improvement, it has since sort of reverted back to conflict again. Again, multicultural Iraq. So when you think of Iraq, you think of a place whose boundaries were established by the United Kingdom. So as a result, you basically superimpose boundaries on 3 different cultures: Sunni Arabs, Shia, and Kurdish. So, think it's hard from an American standpoint, right? In this country, we talk a lot about diversity and multiculturalism and all that stuff. In many parts of the world, I hate to break it to you, that is not what they want. It just isn't. It's difficult for an American, and especially an American of age 20 to 30, who's grown up with lots of multiculturalism studies and education and trying to understand different religions and backgrounds and all that stuff. It's not the case in many parts of the world. That's just the way it is. So when you make borders that basically put different groups within a border, that can often be problematic. It's just the way it is. Of course, here's some of the flows out of Syria into what we call Lebanon and Jordan and Turkey. And once in Turkey, they were able to make it to the European Union. And there you see a different kind of flow. This would be the ones out of Africa through Sicily, which would be the closest point. And once you're in Sicily and Italy, well, once you're in Sicily, you're in Europe. And then you can travel north towards France and Germany and Sweden and the United Kingdom. The idea of globalization, here we're talking about oil. And oil, even though this graphic is a bit dated already, oil still, even as we talk about and think about alternative fuel sources, oil is still one of those things that we are willing to go get in places that are very, very far away. And Saudi Arabia in the Middle East has the biggest reserves of oil of anyone in the world. Environmental issues. So let's talk about the idea of water and water stress. Water desalination, which is taking seawater and turning it into fresh water, is a very energy intensive and environmentally tricky endeavor, because when you desalinize ocean water, there's a remaining super salty brine that has to be dumped somewhere, and that's usually in the ocean. And that tends to alter the chemistry of the water near where you dump it, and that can have environmental consequences. So water is sort of the big elephant in the room, really, no matter where you are in this map. So from all the way into the Western region, Morocco, Western Sahara, Algeria, all the way into Iran to the furthest eastern point. So we'll talk about water. The idea of hydropolitics is a big deal in Israel, because Israel shares its geography with the West Bank / Palestine. And here's what a desalination plant looks like. So, it may look like an oil. It's basically taking in, and by the way, there is that map at the beginning of the palm. There it is. That's the palm. And here's the desalination plant in Dubai. It takes in water, sucks it in. They basically convert it into fresh water, and they dump the super salty leftover back into the ocean. Again, it's used for generating drinking water, electricity. It can be done sustainably, but it is very, very expensive. So in the future, if desalination becomes a super easy, cheap event, then we're talking about solving one of the biggest problems across the earth, which is access to water. But for now, places like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, they can afford it. So therefore they use it. But think about all those places in sub-Saharan Africa that cannot. The importance of water. So we're talking about whether it is the Straits of Hormuz, which is this little area here between Iran and Oman, or that little piece of water, that river between in Istanbul, or the Suez Canal. And if you've ever doubted the power of globalization in 2021, this ship got stuck. And when it got stuck for about a week, it blocked it, meaning it led to about $400 million per hour trade loss. And it's a ship full of all the crap people love. Hoodies and computers and shoes and flip-flops and televisions and whatever else. That's globalization in one image right there. It is full of containers, and those containers are full of stuff. So if you've ever doubted the power of globalization, boom, there it is. Literally, there was a traffic jam of ships on the other side of this that really couldn't go anywhere for over a week. The idea of water. So this is what you can do with a desert. Turn it into a very green area if you have enough water and fertilizer. We do this in the United States. It's called the Imperial Valley of California. And I showed you that in the very, very first lesson, where we've taken water from the Colorado River and we've turned the desert green. And that is where you get in fact, that is where you get every single one of the almonds you ever eat, if you eat them. If you drink almond milk, it all comes from California. All of it. Like all of it. Fruits, vegetables, lettuce, things that you can't grow in New York in January, in December, in February. Get it? When you get blueberries in New York at the supermarket, at Hannaford's, or wherever you do your shopping, and you buy a pint of blueberries or strawberries, they don't come from New York. Not in winter, anyway. So that's, again, globalization at work. Climate. Again, we mentioned this, the idea of general aridity. So B climates dominate. B climates are the ones that are dry. Population and settlement, well, as you can imagine, it's uneven in its distribution. So everybody is either on the northwest side, right along the Mediterranean coastline, Egypt, of course, and then Mecca and Medina in places that are sort of culturally significant. But there are huge areas. There's areas the size of the entire United States that have fewer than 6 people per square kilometer. So you may go days without seeing another human. And that's kind of hard to think about when you live in New York, whether it's New York State or New York City. So let's look at some of the data. So in this region, we have what's considered developed and developing within the region. So notice fertility rates for Iraq, Palestine, Sudan, Yemen are all pretty high, whereas other places like the United Arab Emirates, where Dubai is, super low, like the United States. But generally speaking, all of them are dropping. So here is, of course, Morocco, 2020. It's down from 2.7 just 7 years ago, down to 2.2. So it's definitely slowing down in its growth. Here's Turkey, 1.9. So it's already roughly at the population stage the United States is in right now. Iran, a clear generational shift, and they went from a type 2, stage 2 country here to a stage basically 4 in about 15 to 20 years, which is a remarkable shift. This is super fast. Here is Iraq in 2020. Look at the difference between neighbors, Iran and Iraq. Iraq is starting to slow down. If you had looked at this image 5 years ago, it was clearly a stage 2. But now it's basically early stage 3 and dropping quickly. So Iraq has experienced at least some semblance of normality post the Iraq War of 2003 and beyond. So there's some improvement going on there. But if you look at Iraq and the effect of wars, there you can see the fact that both of them, the 1990 and 2003 Iraqi wars, had a significant effect on population. Temporary, but noticeable. Here's the idea of imbalance. And so we're talking about a place like the United Arab Emirates and or Kuwait. Borrowed workers tend to be almost exclusively male. They're the workers that perform those duties that the local population doesn't want to perform. Construction, the service industry, the hospitality industry. And so as a result, you tend to have a large bump in population from about 20 years of age to about 45 years of age. That looks very different than the corresponding female population in the same country. So most of these borrowed workers tend to be from Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, so South Asia. And again, where a lot of these folks are coming from: the Philippines, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. They're seeking economic opportunity. And oftentimes they will work there, send money back home, and or work there for a few years and then go back to wherever they came from. And so it has a significant impact not only on the economy, but also on the gender and population numbers for that particular place where they go to. Let's see, let's look at the idea of where agriculture takes place. Obviously, Agriculture is something that is very difficult. So there are whole stretches where there is absolutely no agriculture. And then there are places where the agriculture is irrigated, oasis irrigated, or irrigated as a function of near the river. And then there is the idea of nomadism. And that is where folks move with the season depending on where conditions are best. And that still happens. Let's see. Let's look at the idea of settlement. And there's that image from that hotel. If you go to the Bahamas, Nassau, you get to Paradise Island. And there you have this beautiful hotel that's very, very popular. Well, in Dubai, the same company created one, except they created it in the Arabic style. So the building or the hotel is almost the same, but it's designed and built with sort of an Arabic flair to the architecture. Let's look at religion. So religion is, of course, very significant. Islam is the dominant religion, with pockets of Christianity and Judaism in the region. If you go to a place like Israel, to give you a sense of how big it is, Israel is about the size of New Jersey, roughly. And Israel is not homogeneous. There's obviously Jews, there are Christians, and there are Muslims in Israel that are actual Israeli citizens. It isn't the homogeneous place you think it would be. But here's an image I took. I took this photo when I went to Israel, and you see in this image an image of Christianity, the Mount of Olives, the image of Judaism, which is the Western Wall, and the Dome of the Rock, which is an image of Islam. If you think about Islam itself and its origin, its beginnings there in what we call Mecca and the Medina area, and the expansion away through trade routes and conquests of long ago. If you think about the diffusion of Islam through Africa, the majority of North Africa is predominantly Muslim, like 80 to 100% Muslim. That area that we talked about last week, Sub-Saharan Africa, is less so. Here's the diffusion of Islam throughout the world by percentage. Again, it's basically the region we're talking about today. Of course, it extends further east and further south than just the Middle East. This is where you tend to find the majority of Muslims, and the majority of them are now found in Asia Pacific. So Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines. This is an image of Mecca from above. If you're not a Muslim, you're not allowed to visit this city. But from the air, you can see, for example, this is the world's tallest hotel. It's called the Kingdom Tower, and this is Mecca itself right there, the biggest mosque in the world. And here, that's, if you want to think about the importance of Islam to this particular region, this is here is called the Kaaba. And it's believed to be the birthplace of Muhammad. It's significant to both types of Muslims, Sunnis and Shias. And basically, one of the pillars of Islam is making a pilgrimage to Mecca. Okay? In addition to these other 4 pillars. So this is super significant, that this right here would be this right there. About Christianity, there's a similar diffusion, and this diffusion happened as sort of the Roman world moved away from Jerusalem into what we now call Europe. Okay, and that diffusion then devolved or evolved into a more Roman Catholic versus Protestant type of Christianity. Here's Jerusalem. So, for example, this is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And this is a big church that is basically on top of a tiny little church inside. And here you can see the roof of that little tiny church. So this is super significant to Christianity there in Israel. And if you go to Jerusalem, you can go and look at all the 4 quadrants or quarters, and you can do the stations of the cross. And you can go from the Jewish quarter to the Armenian quarter to the Christian quarter to the Muslim quarter. And as you travel across these different gates, it looks different, it smells different, it sounds different. And it's a really small area, quite frankly. It's not very big. This is old Jerusalem or original Jerusalem. And this is sort of an air view of it. This is the Western Wall. This is not a mosque. This is the Dome of the Rock. This is what Jews consider to be their most holy site. So basically the old Temple of Solomon, what's left of it. So the Western Wall of it. And because this is sort of on top of it, you can kind of see why this is a place of conflict, quite frankly. Very interesting place. Very, very, very interesting place. If you get a chance to go, I super highly recommend it. Because, well, it's very, very interesting. Here's how Judaism spread across Europe, or diaspora, and how Jews are basically spread across the world. And this is a bit dated. I haven't been able to find a newer image. This is as of 2010. But it gives you an idea. The majority of Jews are in North America, the United States, and Canada, more so than in Israel. Language, of course. Sort of the breakdown from Persian. You can associate Persian with Iranian, Arabic, wherever you see the green. Of course, English is probably spoken throughout this whole region, and French, depending on colonial influence. So you can't get away from that. The geopolitical framework and the colonial legacy. So in places like Algeria, French influence is undeniable. And in fact, where do the majority of Algerians migrate to when they leave Africa? They go to France. So you can't get away from that. Water as one of the bigger resources and controversial areas there, where you find the majority of water resources versus where you don't. And here's what a security border or barrier looks like. So very unnatural, very sort of harsh to the landscape. Economic development. So here's how, why this area is significant. It's basically crude oil. Even in an age of wanting to get away from fossil fuel, this is still a big deal. So crude oil production and or natural gas. So having said all this, this is where I'll end the presentation. Very complicated, very dynamic region. I would say that culture, language, and religion are really dominant, more so than in other areas of the world. Like religion, I think it's far more significant to the region here than I would say in North America or even Latin America. I'm not saying that religion isn't important in those regions, but I think it's a more indelible part of culture in what we call North Africa and Southwest Asia. Having said all that, I hope you have a great week. And if you have any issues, come to the study hour. Otherwise, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.